The small task of tackling Real Madrid. Today's analysis is going to try and get to the heart of a team full of so much singularity, who don't play by the typical rules. So what rules do they play by? For an Arsenal point of view, we're going to look in detail at not only the potential shortcomings of this Madrid juggernaut, but Arsenal's own strengths and possible templates to try and disrupt the seeming inevitability of Los Blancos. Welcome back to the Harvey Gratian YouTube channel. I'm so glad you found us or are joining us again. So, I hear you ask, is there a chance? Yes, there is. They say styles make fights, and heck, we've just seen Arsenal come off a historic win away at PSV in the Champions League, and less than 72 hours later draw against Manchester United, and then against Chelsea in the 1-0 win produced some really telling signs for this Real Madrid matchup. We've covered this season's often familiar trials and tribulations in depth before, as well as the reasons to celebrate parts of it. But now it's time to place full focus on this mammoth Champions League quarter-final. Boy, I'm excited. So let's get started, shall we? As we're going to see, it's inadequate to bind this Real Madrid team to a rigid structure of playing, but there are certain foundations and essential qualities that start in their play from deep in possession that really opens up an analysis of what is so unquantifiable about them. This is their most utilised deep base. Wide fullbacks, a double pivot who stretch and shift around, play with their spacing, Jude beginning in that number 10 in this flexible 4-2-4 or 4-2-3-1, able to drop into midfield, pin higher up, run the channels, release in behind. There is essentially always two players standing on the touchline, normally in this organisation, with Mbappe actually doing a lot of dropping and linking, but there is lots of movement. Looking at the numbers, Thibaut Courtois unsurprisingly is used less on the ball than David Raya and goes long less than him too. But the significance of this sway is what surprised me. In essence, Real Madrid, despite possessing the transitional threat that they do try and play through that initial pressure. Their pivots try and stack, create big spaces to promote overloads or to carry into, but so much progressive emphasis falls on Valverde at right back. He stays shallower and often more central than Mendy at left back, who instead looks to play a more direct foil to Vinicius, Mbappe and Bellingham's left-hand sided overloads. But if that leads teams to press more towards Madrid's right-hand side, Valverde can punish you with a pass in behind, a first-time line cutter, or inject pace with a combination or off-ball run. However, if you get this Madrid team in your press and tight to them, their deep build-up can begin to look increasingly unconnected for me. Their fullbacks can be isolated from their midfield partners, and because of this, their success in the build-up comes from wider or going over the top of it, manufacturing these transitions for themselves, but not in typical ways. Madrid actually rarely occupy the opposition's centre-backs, meaning when Courtois does launch it, they are hardly bothered about winning the first contact. Instead, they bunch together. They often cluster centrally, and as soon as the opposition make that first chaotic contact, Real become very relational. They have runners off the shoulder, bodies deeper to pounce on ricochets. Higher up the pitch, for Real, it comes down to three terms, and that's speed, switches and relationism. 99% of the time, Real are playing with maximum width. What do I mean? Well, here we see this kind of lopsided 4-2-4, emphasising players getting close and associative on the left, not necessarily occupying all lanes, but regardless, Rodrygo will be camping out on that far touchline, and this shows just how the balance of the Madrid attack just works itself out in this way. Vinicius's run pulls everyone deeper, Mbappe links, and he knows straight away that that ball to Rodrygo is on. This also lends itself to a lot of switches, and I mean a lot. It's relentless. Real have completed 165 switches in La Liga this season, 49 higher than anyone else. Arsenal, on the other hand, in the Premier League have hit just 61. This is not an inherently better way of playing, but it's how Real can hurt you. They prefer to launch attack after attack in wide zones, move it from side to side swiftly, and here we see how their structure, or lack thereof, lends itself to that. They stack their pivots, Valverde pings it, Diaz and Mbappe are in these sort of twin 10 positions, it's laid off to Rudiger, who hits another switch to Rodrygo. There is so much shifting of the block, moving from an overloaded area to an isolated one. And this lends itself to more take-on, dribbly dominant approaches in the final third, in relation to Arsenal, who can lack at times that immediacy of action and final acceleration into space. Arsenal are undoubtedly fluid, especially in the first and second phases, but will often give themselves a more global base in the final third like this, set ourselves to spend time there. Whereas Real Madrid, in a flash, can stretch you wide and initiate these off-the-cuff dynamic combinations. Vinny here teases his man, Rodrygo is making sure he's stretching, Hermoso is understandably worried about Mbappe, De Paul is a second late to Diaz, and Vinicius has gone. That's how they access in behind you, and also how they penetrate the inside. It's totally intuitive, prioritising a player's feel for the game. That doesn't necessarily mean they can't form shapes like this with this approach, because relationism is ultimately about players' solutions for the best occupation of space, which at times can be more traditional positional play. But when they do make it tight, condensed, they carry, have 1-2 touch sequences, players are nipping around in close proximity like this, it is so difficult to stop. But once more, those fullbacks in this example going on the outside to maintain that width. Rodrygo as well is incisive when he can carry on the inside like this, and you can see how Vinicius and Mbappe rotate, Bellingham's gravity through the middle to open that space up. But all these attacks are launched and end quickly, so that begs a question: how do Arsenal negate this as best as possible out of possession? If Real Madrid can trap themselves at times in their deep build, if you want to eliminate the time they have to switch play, if you want to force them long into positions you are better placed to win the duels, then irrespective of Arteta's overall game plan, for me, that Arsenal initial high disruptive press that can play make for us is absolutely fundamental. If we press as we normally do, arcing our angles towards our right, Timber becomes even more important as someone who is excellent at following his winger tight, especially when it comes to someone as snappy as Vinicius. Elsewhere, the 6 will more closely man-mark Bellingham in his freer role. Ødegaard will wait to jump and shadow the pivot. Rice will be making up -1s across the pitch, and we will mostly keep a +1 on the defensive line. Although, as ever, we'll be ready to spring into a full man-to-man when the number 6 jumps, and the wingers will diligently track Madrid's fullbacks. Now, transitionally, we are arguably the best staffed out there of anyone to go stride for stride with Madrid's fast breaks. But I'm also not going to pretend that this kind of lineup, which is the most likely, does not have its blind spots. Arsenal are just as fluid, well-drilled and intelligent out of possession as they are in it. And as we saw, for example, against Manchester City, we can tilt our press the other way. And we will also, when Madrid do inevitably progress the ball higher, spend some more time in our settled block. And I think to try and play the game at a different pace for Madrid will be really handy. And such a game state may well beckon for more of a setup like this. Martinelli and Trossard can be flexible in their positioning so long as Martinelli is the one cheating the highest. And this is unlikely from the start, but if we are in a position ever in the tie where a result has to be protected, then I would not be surprised if we saw something as filthy as this. So we understand Madrid's unique style, their principles in possession. But what about reversing some things, looking this time at how Arsenal can hurt Real, and also look at some legitimate weak spots in Real Madrid's out-of-possession complexion? What is translatable to an Arsenal team who, especially in deeper build-up, I think are actually even more flexible and hard to pin down than Ancelotti's Galacticos? I want to be clear, if Madrid can lack intensity and discipline off the ball, that isn't always a bad thing. It takes some load, for example, off their forwards' legs, it stokes the fire. But from an Arsenal point of view, we must take advantage of this. It starts from the top of their press for Real Madrid. These problems, I think, typically setting up in this, albeit relaxed 4-4-2 block. Against City, who formed this 2-3 base, Mbappe and Vinicius were tasked with blocking lanes, Rodrygo followed Gvardiol narrow, Ceballos was through on Stones, and Jude is on Akanji. This is a relatively settled look, but when players shift around, gaps start to appear. Here, Rodrygo has to jump onto Ake, meaning Camavinga transfers across to Gvardiol, but that lack of intensity, I think, and it's not always definitively structural, but sometimes just being a yard off here and there, means that Savio can punch it back through to Stones without Mbappe closing that distance between the first two lines of the press. And they also have difficulty tracking men over larger distances. For Haaland's opener at the Etihad, KDB drops into this left-back zone, Grealish draws Tchouameni low to ensure Haaland has a 1v1 with Asensio, but it's Gvardiol who provides the dynamic counter-movements, continuing untracked high, and the first time City actually left that 2-3 build, they scored. There is a fluidity in this example, a thrust from fullback, and a pulling around of Real Madrid's man-to-man jobs inside their pressing structure, not across the pitch. And it's easy to see how this type of defensive structure or organisation is something Arsenal typically have found a lot of joy against. This is Barcelona against Madrid in the Super Cup final. No one follows Xavi into the back line. This for Arsenal could be Rice, who we've depended on in recent times as a big stretcher of backlines, pivoting high off Merino, whose link play from the false nine I think has been really impressive. And I was surprised for a backline full of aggressive defenders, how unsure these Madrid defenders are at times to follow these dropping forwards, with Mbappe getting his angles wrong here catalyses a chain reaction of indecision whether to engage. Alvarez links play in that high right pocket and finds the right back. Now, Arsenal, we are probably the opposite of this version of Atletico. Our fluidity, dynamism and unpredictability comes from our fullbacks, and that central bite can be a bit of a premium for us. If Rice is in that left centre mid and not in the 6, he needs to pick his moments, of course, to burst high. It can't be something he does and launches every attack. I mean, we are lucky enough at the moment, the way he's charging about the pitch, that he's really having that global influence on the team. But in this example, you can see how maybe Rice staying and dropping lower, with Calafiori being that thrusting option. And this time, PSV's man-to-man tendencies within their block have been dragged and manipulated, and that space is opened up back inside, but now for Ødegaard, and Timber is the one that overlaps. This is another possibility where we've overloaded PSV, despite them being man-to-man elsewhere. Timber goes high and draws Noah Lang back. Ødegaard floats, and these free rolls that Declan Rice can pick up too have really caused Real Madrid issues out of possession. Here, they try and lock off one side, but a yard off everywhere. It's really that simple. The Villarreal pivots move around. Baena, the left mid, who caused havoc drifting laterally. Can we get Rice moving in these blind spots, or Ødegaard drifting on top like this? But back to the PSV game. Nwaneri here, with Timber acting as more of a winger, is primed inside the block. Now, Vinicius is not going to follow Timber like our wingers would. We know this is a two-sided coin, of course, attacking and defensively, but this is one of the genuine advantages for us against a back four, not a back five, which upscales the impact our fullbacks can make. And look here, against City, Lewis, of course, right back, is more central, but Gvardiol's double movement creates separation for Rodrygo, who I don't think is Real Madrid's best presser. That's Jude Bellingham, but Rodrygo is their most diligent, often tracking the left back deeper. But here, Kovacic shuffles it through to Lewis, and look how wide, how un-Arteta Vinny's positioning is, allowing Lewis to punch it into Foden, who dribbles inside and wins the penalty. Now, Rice has developed these flexible, same intuitive relationships with both Calafiori and Lewis-Skelly, and I think the latter is a nudge above Calafiori in the pecking order for Madrid because of his duelling capacity. But the more I found myself watching Real Madrid, the more I was tempted by the potential of starting both Lewis-Skelly and Calafiori. combining Miles's dynamism when he receives the ball with Calafiori's plummeting and uncontrollability off it. This passage gives the kind of energy that Real Madrid give off in their final third play. And I think novel solutions, testing and experimentation can give us some real upside as we go into the rest of this season. Overall, my game plan in possession is for us to be brave and fluid in the first and second phases, trying to prise the Madrid shape open. The first half against Chelsea was a quintessential marker of that. In the first minute here, we shift from a 4-2 into a diamond, and look how modular we are with who changes high and low. And then higher up, I'd like if we can set ourselves something a bit closer to this. Rice in the left back, of course, interchanging, but here, Rice, if he is in the left centre mid again, giving our 6 a bit of support lower, and our fullbacks picking their moments. Martinelli, of course, has returned too, and although I'm infinitely patient with Saka's return, it would be an unreal boost to have him with us. You can see a lot of these templates are really just trying to squeeze absolutely everything we have out of the guys with X factor in our team to glean as much offensive gravity we have, whilst ensuring we leave ourselves well enough protected. That, for me, is the name of the game. So, the question was, can Arsenal topple Madrid? Yes, they can. But the real question for me is, how can we generate as much as them without making the game stretched, our legs tired, where Madrid really come into their own? I think fullback winger matchups look really decisive, and our bravery in moments to be inventive in possession or aggressive in the press, and how that is balanced by probably a more pragmatic approach will be telling. But at least for now, hopefully, you know a bit more about who Madrid are and where Arsenal can potentially get them flailing a bit on the pitch. The task is immense. The night is full of terrors, but I'm confident that this team competes. Frustrations with this season have come and persisted, it seems, but this is a tie to cherish, and with a lot of positives still to take away, nevertheless. That gives us a shot. Real Madrid away.